In 1989, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, did something that shocked the entire world. The democracy protests in China were posing a threat to the CCP's rule, and they were scared. So scared, in fact, that the CCP decided to launch an attack against its own citizens to silence the protests. This brutal action resulted in the death of thousands of innocent Chinese students and left many more injured. Fast forward to the present day, and something similar is happening in China, sending chills down the CCP's spine. Chinese citizens across the country have taken to social media in a way that has never been seen before. Thousands of aspiring homeowners have initiated a movement to stop paying their mortgages, hoping to put pressure on the CCP and banks to treat them fairly. Protests have erupted in multiple cities, and this crusade seems to be gaining momentum with each passing day. The CCP is so worried about this movement that they have deployed tanks to maintain stability. For the first time in over 30 years, the CCP is fearing for its existence, and it all revolves around China's real estate bubble. Experts suggest that the CCP views this situation not as a banking crisis, but as a political protest. Government officials are extremely fearful of how this may unfold. Meanwhile, China could already be on the brink of a recession due to a massive protest over frozen bank deposits. In Zhengzhou, hundreds of people gathered, and tens of thousands have started withholding payments, demanding compensation. As tensions escalate, security personnel have been accused of using violence against the protesters, regardless of their age, gender, or physical abilities. The big Chinese banks are at risk, with over $9 trillion in loans in danger of defaulting. If the situation worsens, it could lead to the collapse of China and the CCP. This mortgage crisis is just one of the challenges the CCP is grappling with. Other issues, such as the zero-COVID policies and bank deposit scams in Henan, pose significant risks to China's fragile economy. However, the mortgage situation is the most critical threat, impacting trillions of dollars and vital industries, like banking and real estate, as well as millions of households. According to a well-respected expert, this mortgage crisis could be 100 times worse than the 2008 financial crisis. To keep this news under wraps, the CCP's censorship mechanisms are working tirelessly to suppress any articles or videos that reveal the truth. There are suspicions that CCP bots have been disliking critical videos about China, thereby suppressing their reach in the algorithm. The content creator requests viewers to support the video by liking it to counteract this suppression, especially when covering topics critical of the CCP. While the protests began in July, the underlying problems in China's real estate market have been brewing for decades. To understand how these protests are threatening the CCP's rule, it is essential to delve into the journey of the Chinese economy. In the United States, owning a home is considered an important part of the American dream. However, affordability concerns have made homeownership less popular among newer generations. In China, on the other hand, the importance of owning a house has only increased over the past few decades. Real estate is a highly trusted asset class, and property ownership holds significant cultural significance for the Chinese people. Families use real estate as a means to plan for retirement, and individuals with real estate are considered attractive marriage prospects. The amount of real estate one owns directly impacts their social status in society. Usually, a company like Evergrande would typically lease a piece of land from the local government. Then, they would proceed to sell the houses that were supposed to be built on that land and receive full payment for the houses even before breaking ground. Due to the high demand for real estate, companies never had any trouble selling out. People were eager to take out mortgages and buy houses, hoping to own real estate in the future. However, the main problem arises when companies like Evergrande don't use the money from the sales to start construction. Instead, they use it as a down payment to buy even more land, intending to sell more apartments in the future. This practice itself is a significant issue that should not have been allowed in the first place. Any unbiased person can see that this unsustainable cycle is destined to collapse. The responsibility for overseeing these practices lies with the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. However, they have delegated this responsibility to the local governments. Here lies another problem. Local governments directly benefit from the real estate pyramid schemes that companies like Evergrande have been running. In China, one of the main ways local governments generate revenue is by leasing land to developers. Consequently, the more risk these property developers take on, the higher the bids on the land leased by the government. Approximately 50% of local government's revenue comes from leasing out land, and this same government should be protecting its citizens from these risky practices. This situation exemplifies perverse incentives. Moreover, there is pervasive corruption surrounding these land leases, exacerbating the issues. This corruption is one of the primary reasons why China's real estate bubble has grown so large. Regulators have been slow to intervene because they benefit directly from these practices. The CCP attempted to regain control by implementing the 3 red line policies for property developers, but it was too late. As a consequence, the debt burden continues to weigh heavily on China's Evergrande Group. Angry suppliers are protesting the developers' unpaid bills, and bondholders' patience has dwindled. The shady practices don't stop there. Evergrande lists these houses as assets on their balance sheet to obtain more loans from banks to complete construction. However, these houses have already been sold to other people, so no matter what accounting magic is used, they cannot be considered Evergrande's assets. Unfortunately, Evergrande is not the only company employing such deceptive tactics. Almost every real estate company in China operates in a similar manner, resulting in an over-leveraged sector akin to a Ponzi scheme. However, continuous growth is necessary for the scheme to persist. If people lose trust in Evergrande's solvency, growth becomes impossible, which is precisely what happened. When one payment is missed, chaos ensues. In early last year, one of Evergrande's subsidiary companies failed to make a loan payment, leading to a deeper examination of the company's financials. This triggered the collapse of the House of Cards, with news of contagion spreading worldwide. The debt burden continues to weigh on China's Evergrande Group, causing a financial crunch. The debt crisis at Evergrande is snowballing, raising numerous questions about the company. Suppliers, demanding payment, are circulating notices, and small business owners and homebuyers waiting for completion are growing increasingly desperate. Investors who were promised various returns have started demanding their money back. These protests have made authorities nervous. The news that Evergrande could default on $300 billion worth of loans further spread panic throughout the economy. People also realized that this problem isn't limited to Evergrande. The entire real estate sector is over-leveraged and starting to crumble. Chinese developers collectively owe around $5.3 trillion in debt. Recognizing the enormity of the problem, the CCP decided to step in and soften the blow in 2021. Currently, these 300 projects represent over $100 billion of debt held by China's major banks. When taking into account the fact that some prominent developers defaulted on their debt last year, this situation raises concerns for China's banking institutions. The issue becomes even more alarming when we consider not just the potential default of $100 billion, but also the increasing number of people joining the mortgage boycott. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, has already instructed banks and news organizations to stop publishing reports about these mortgage boycotts. Party officials are making every effort to suppress this news. However, these boycotts pose an existential crisis for Chinese banks, with the potential to be 100 times worse than the challenges American banks faced in 2008. One significant difference between the 2008 financial crisis in the United States and the current situation in China is that a majority of these loans are backed by houses that are yet to be built. Consequently, banks cannot simply repossess the houses and cut their losses when borrowers default. Instead, banks are forced to bear these losses. If the number of defaults continues to rise, there is a chance that major Chinese banks might collapse. In fact, one of the big 4 state banks in China has already limited people's withdrawals. Most of you are probably familiar with how the modern banking system works, but let's provide a quick overview for those who may not be. Banks typically lend the money deposited by customers and aim to earn interest on these loans to generate profits. Usually, central banks set the reserve requirement, which determines the portion of deposits that banks must keep in reserve. For instance, if the reserve requirement is set at 10%, banks are required to retain $10 in the vault for every $100 in deposits. They can then loan out the remaining $90 and charge interest on it. While this is a simplified example, similar transactions occur millions of times within an economy, forming the basis of the modern banking system. For every $100 in deposits, banks can create approximately $1,000 of money in circulation. This fractional reserve banking system has contributed significantly to economic growth over the past century. However, the system's viability depends on depositors trusting banks to safeguard their money. If too many loans issued by banks become worthless, that trust begins to erode. Hence, the United States implemented strict lending regulations after the 2008 crisis to ensure that banks exercise caution in their lending practices. As an increasing number of homebuyers in China default on their loans, Chinese banks are at risk of losing depositors' trust. Imposing limits on withdrawals does not help build that trust. If a significant number of depositors begin withdrawing their funds from banks, it could trigger a bank run and potentially lead to bank collapses. This is where the major concern lies for the CCP. The Chinese economy heavily relies on both the financial sector and the real estate sector. Real estate accounts for approximately 30% of China's GDP, while 7 out of the top 10 companies in China are financial institutions. Consequently, as news of these boycotts spreads, the CCP held an emergency meeting with banks to discuss the increasing risk of defaults. To assist struggling developers, the CCP is contemplating injecting over $1 trillion into real estate companies to facilitate the completion of construction projects. It is worth noting that last year, when the news about Evergrande emerged, the CCP was staunchly opposed to bailing out failing companies, as it did not want to promote risky business behavior in China. However, now that they realize the potential repercussions for the government, CCP officials are changing their stance on bailouts. Furthermore, the CCP has intensified censorship surrounding this topic in an attempt to prevent more people from joining the boycotts and protests. As mentioned earlier, the CCP perceives this situation as a political protest rather than a banking crisis. Government officials are extremely fearful about how this situation might unfold. It is likely that they will take any necessary measures to suppress any news related to this topic. Typically, my videos about China receive a substantial number of dislikes from Chinese bots as they aim to harm the channel's visibility in the YouTube algorithm. Therefore, I kindly request that you take a moment to scroll down and hit the like button, as it means the world to me. These videos require a significant amount of time and effort to produce. Thank you for watching.